Hey!
Hello!
Welcome to DnDTime Talks, where we discuss all things Dungeons and also Dragons. I am Pete.
I'm Jeremy. How are you,
Jeremy,
Pete?
how are you tonight?
I beat you to it. Pete. You have to answer first.
Delay on Discord dictates that we probably send it at the same time. So now, Jeremy, in the moment before talks, I challenge you to a game of rock, paper, scissors.
All right.
You ready?
Ready?
Rock,
paper,
paper, scissors, shoot.
So we both pick rock.
Okay,
All right.
I'll go first. Oh wait, okay, fine.
Best two out of three,
Rock.
Pete.
No, not a best two out of three. Rock, paper.
Paper, scissors, shoot.
Okay, I lost. You went
I
rock.
got rock.
You win. I'm doing good. How are you?
Pete, I picked to go. Data. He's up on his thing. He knows it's time for him to go to work, and then he gets. I'm doing great, Pete. How about you?
I'm pretty good. Data seems to really be learning. All of this tutelage that you've been kind of bestowing upon him has been paying off.
I bribe him with treats.
Yeah, really, you're
Sit
just
up there. Oh,
I guess it's not
goodness.
tutelage. It's
You're getting a whole lot of treats.
You're paying him, and he should get paid for all of that work that he puts in. And also, hello to chat. We got Max
Chat, how are you
Meister.
guys?
I see Biotic Shiba. I see Reflected 10-8 and Sword Co here, all straight up chilling in the crib. My homies. Oh no, I made a mistake and I forgot to do the stream thing because I didn't realize we were starting yet.
Pete,
but the announcement's out now.
Pete. How could you?
How could I?
But you are chat. Indeed. But you're not Chad. There's no D in this chat.
You're no Chad. The way I pronounced that name was, I don't know how I did it, and it was very difficult. But I know that I was saying
Chad.
at that time, it's kind of a Chad.
Well, it's kind of like Kurt.
An odd, yeah, kind of like Kurt. Frog's here. Yo, everybody. Yo, yourself, Frog. It is good to see you tonight.
We have an awesome subject tonight, by the way. Just jumping right in. Segue, smooth. We're talking about world building, something Pete and I love to do. And we do way too much. No, just enough.
World building is one of the more interesting topics I think that we could have ever done. And if we actually wanted to cover world building, we'd need to do our own show just about it. And I'm not referring to DnDTime Worlds at all, because we don't really talk about like how to world build. We just have fun and do it. We just kind of get in the sandbox and play around. But really, when we're talking about world building, as much as we're talking about like DMing, we're really talking about like writing and storytelling, which is a craft beyond my own comprehension, except at the barest of degrees, that enough to get me by for D&D.
Yeah, and I mean, world building's a really cool subject, right? Because like everyone loves to world. If you're a DM and you've started to run your own setting, or hell, even if you're playing an existing setting and you change literally anything, you're world building.
Yeah.
So pretty much everyone who DMs at any point who's worth their salt world builds a little bit. Even if you just play modules, hell, sometimes you got to think on your feet. That is world building a little bit. But yeah, this is a really interesting topic. There's so much you can talk about. We're going to try and keep it, I think, kind of base level, right?
We're going to be talking base level. We're going to be talking a lot about, because I think there's a bit of a misconception about world building, and that is its importance is a little bit overstressed in a lot of places in D&D. World building is a lot of fun, but I think of world building as a lot like kind of bodybuilding in real life, where, you know, people who like work out and get these huge muscles, they're really flashy and they're super impressive. It's probably fun to like look like that and to build up, but you don't need that muscle on your day-to-day basis. It's all for show. And world building in a lot of sense is the same way. You're world building because you want to show off a little bit as a DM. You want to have all these kind of like intricate places and components of your world. You want your players to feel immersed, and that's the good stuff on world building. And that's why you do it, is you want your players to kind of be pulled into your story. And also, again, it's just a lot of fun to do. And so sometimes as a DM, it's just like the dessert of DMing. Like, oh, I'm going to take some time and just come up with a bunch of names for NPCs today, because that's something that I do actually enjoy doing. So
yeah. And another thing, like, similar along that same bodybuilding analog, sometimes all of that can be really intimidating for whether you be a fan of some kind of sport and like, all right, wow, this athlete is very strong. They're kind of like they could crush me with their hands. That's intimidating. Or they could probably crush me with like their legs, or like maybe like an arm could probably crush my body. But that kind of stuff can scare people. So there's a point for world building that goes a little too far, and we're going to try and touch on that too as we kind of go through
Yeah,
the talk.
absolutely.
Also,
Um,
hello, Maddie Morgs and Sword Co here. The Temple of the
Hi.
Great Ninja Camel Spider Moose in the deserts of Alabama. I'm
Now
sorry,
that's
from
some
the
high
Alabama
quality
desert.
world building right there.
Some high quality world building. So,
Um,
let's jump right in.
yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit, or I guess we already have talked a little bit about world building, what it is,
Yeah,
but
but
just to
what
define the
is it?
term, yeah, it's basically it's the creation of any information, lore, or details about your world. But I would argue that world building is a little bit those things which are extraneous. And there's a difference between, as Jeremy was saying before, anything can be world building. Deciding that there's a town that your players are going to start in, that is technically world building, but that's kind of the more necessary world building to make your game function and to have like anything that you're doing. So let's talk about some of the things that like are like that kind of more extraneous world building. And these are things like creating elaborate pantheons full of all of these kind of different gods, building like timelines and historical pasts for your world filled with different like wars and events that you've created dates for, and had like the names of the
Calendars and
heroes.
dates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
calendars. That's a great one, Jeremy. All of these kind of like distant kingdoms and other continents that your players will never even adventure on in the campaign, but you've fleshed out anyway. So at some point, one of the NPCs can mention it, and the players will go, "Wow, the world is so rich."
I mean, hell, even just a tavern in a town, or a or the town, just the name of a town is world building. But there are a couple things that really aren't world building, at least not in the means that we're going to be talking about here. And that's your basic kind of quest. Um, things that your party will run into along the way.
Hmm.
Um, a combat encounters tend not to be really world building, or even some non-combat encounters, but things that are kind of the inevitable, right? That like
Yeah,
we're talking about the fluff. We're not talking about the very bare baseline of what you need to run the
yeah,
adventure. We're talking about all the extra lore, all the extra detail, the things that really round out that bare bones baseline and make it feel more real.
yeah,
And
absolutely. Um,
yeah,
so why in that case would you kind of want to world build? Because we're saying that on one hand it's fun, but also you don't necessarily need to do it. Well, for one thing, the fact that it's fun is a really great reason to do it. um, I just have spent so many hours for my campaigns coming up with like fantasy locations and like all these cool NPCs that I know my players aren't going to meet. But that's just one of the things that, to me as a DM, and I think to a lot of DMs, that's just part of the fun of the job. It's less that you have to build a world and more that you get to build a world when you're the DM.
absolutely. And it's also, I mean, the second major reason of why you'd want to do this is, well, not just fun for you, but sometimes it's fun for your players too.
Oh,
Some
for sure.
players really love that lore. I mean, we talked about them last week a little bit, the historian.
Oh, yeah.
Those kind of players, they want to hear your lore. If you want to write, like, a 10-page document that, like, this is an excerpt from a tome that you found deep within the blah, 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 blah place you were just at, to some people, that is treasure in its own right. They were just so excited to be able to read this cool lore and understand your world. But to other people, maybe it's not. So that's part of the thing, like, reading all that. Read the
Yeah,
room.
knowing how much your players will kind of care about the information, and there are ways to kind of make your players kind of care about the lore. Maybe we'll talk about some of that stuff a little bit later. um but
But I was
another Oh,
oh,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Jeremy. Oh, I
I
was
was
gonna
gonna say
say.
another
Oh,
another
no.
reason. Another reason I'm taking the lead
Yeah,
that you
take
might
it.
care about world building is it'll make you a little more confident, right? If you know what the next town over is, and the party says, oh my goodness, if there are orcs in the forest, and they're new in the forest, what about the town on the other side of the forest? If you don't know what that town is, just like, and you're confused. But if you know what's there, right, it helps you to fill out that bigger picture. Why are there orcs in the forest? Did they do
Yeah.
something to that other town? Were they rebuffed and fled into the forest? It gives you the confidence to know that you can answer these questions if your players ask. And that's a really big deal.
This is just a great kind of adjacent note to that. You're going to do a lot of your world building in your game when you get put in situations when your players do something that you don't expect. Because as much as you've mapped out your region and you know every single territory, I promise you your players will always still surprise you with some odd kind of side quest that they all of a sudden decide is important to them and that they want to go on. And you'll just have to make things up on the fly. If you want to kind of maintain the illusion of having kind of a well thought out world, one of the important things to do is to take notes on the things that you come up with for your world when they happen. Because having notes on all the stuff that you've already prepared, well, that's a little bit easier because you had time to make them. But it's really easy to forget the things that you make up on the fly because you're more focused on running the game. You're not actively trying to remember them. So just as a quick adjacent note there, make sure when you're world building actively while you're also DMing, write down those details because I've made up so many NPCs. Yeah, I've made up so many NPCs that I could remember nothing about. That the players were like, "Oh, I loved that guy. What was his name again?" I have no idea.
I don't know. I don't know who he was.
His name was Jeremy. It wasn't Jeremy, Pete.
No, that definitely wasn't it. No, we hated that NPC.
And then you and then you have to stop and apologize and make up a new name. And then your players who had kind of believed in your world building are now a little bit let down because they found out that it wasn't important. So just take those notes. But yeah, we're talking a little bit about confidence, but that's another thing. It's fun as a player to have a GM that you perceive as good. And world building is stylish for sure. I think a lot of GMs really strive, and I know tons of GMs that pride themselves on being the kind of GM where the players are like, "Oh, how do you keep all of this information in your head at once?" And when a GM hears that, they always kind of swell up a little bit. And it's just like, "Oh, well, I just spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, and I'm a little bit insane," is always the response.
Well, it's like your average module adventure, that's the smart car. It'll get you there, it's fuel efficient, but it looks hideous. The beautiful world building, that's the Tesla right there. That's what you want. There's a certain swagger to having it.
For sure. And I like it when a GM feels very in control of the world. If the GM has confidence in themselves and knows a lot and feel like they're in control of the space, it's easier to entrust your fate to them and know that they're going to treat you right. And that's I think a part of DMing that is at least that aspect of it and that kind of side of it, even though people know that they should have rich worlds, I don't think people quite realize the impact that just being a good GM will just have that positive effect on players.
Absolutely.
In that sense.
Even beyond all that, right? There's actual practical, obviously there's a lot of this psychological, makes you feel confident, makes your players feel confident, it's fun, that's all great. But it's also really helpful. If you know a little bit more about your world, when your players do ask that why question, you'll be able to come up with an answer.
You'll be quick.
And you'll be able to come up with a good answer that you're happy about. When your campaign completely takes a left turn because they crit fail in their survival check and go north instead of east and just walk north for miles on end, that, you can do something now. You know what to do. You don't have to just totally come up with everything on the spot.
That was one of my first ever mistakes as a GM. Is I once made an open door that I didn't know what was behind, that I just didn't think my players would go through for some reason. And then they walked through, and I was like, "Yeah, you're walking, and there's a hallway, And
Can be really
um,
hard to improv, especially if you're newer. Even if you're not newer, it can be really hard to improv sometimes.
absolutely,
So there's
um,
another huge benefit to just world building a little bit. So
for sure.
we've established here you gotta world build a little, at
Let's
least a
go back.
little, preferably a lot because it's fun. But what should people focus their attention on? Like what are the main things to really hone in on when you're world building?
That's a great question, Jeremy. And I think, like we were saying before, it's really easy to kind of get lost in the weeds on this. But a great place to kind of look at to begin is when you're world building. Like we said, this is DMing is a work of passion. Building a world is you're doing it because you're passionate about it. So the first thing that you want to do is build the things that you care about and that you think are really going to make your world interesting and unique, which sounds obvious, but focusing on the things that are important to you in particularly is the best place to start. And you'd be surprised, I think, at how many people don't actually do this, because there are a lot of aspects of world building that people kind of check off like a checklist when they're doing their things, and you don't have to spend any time on things that you don't like or you don't think are going to be important to your world. I think a really big one that I see all the time is I almost never see someone build a world without paying a lot of attention to the pantheon and the gods of that world. Um, and if that's not something as a DM that interests you, you can just decide that, yeah, this isn't an aspect of my world that I want to focus on. This isn't going to drive my story forward. This isn't something that I want the players to necessarily interact with in a major way. And you can just decide, like, yeah, if you're playing cleric, you can just choose a god of your choice. I don't have a custom pantheon for my world. You can just pick a pantheon that already exists, and just say, yeah, you can use this, and instead devote all of your intention to the really elaborate system of currency and economics that you've built in your world, because that's what gets you excited and that's what you want your campaign to focus on.
Yeah, and you got to also make sure not just think about what you like, but also what your players like, right? If you have a
Indeed.
player who's super into pantheons and deities, even if you're not into it, maybe you can give some of that world building away. Say, hey, you come up with the pantheon and
Great
deities.
idea.
And boom, there's a really easy way of making sure you're still catering to them a little bit. But I completely agree with Pete. There's no reason for you to bend over backwards trying to come up with a unique pantheon if you're just not feeling it. Because if you're not feeling it, it's not going to work. That's just a fact of the matter in DMing and in life. Just not going
Yeah,
to
that's
be
definitely
good.
true. And this
Um,
extends to every aspect. You know, if you don't want to come up with a calendar, you can just say, yeah, time passes in the same way it does kind of in our world. There's 365 days in a year, you know, so on and so forth. Any aspect of the world building, you can just choose not to focus on it, even if like a lot of people consider that thing important.
yeah. And so a lot of things I see people doing a lot is if let's say they have a town, right, or they have a map is a great thing to talk about world building because that's what a lot of people confuse a map for world building. They draw a map of their campaign area, whatever you want to call it, world, continent, setting, whatever, and they make a lot of dots, and they draw their rivers and their mountains, and they label all the dots, and maybe they draw some lines to designate this is one kingdom, this is another kingdom, and they do all of that, and they're all excited, and they think that they've just done some world building,
Yeah,
and
they have.
almost they've
Yeah,
started doing world building. The only reason, from a world building perspective, you care about a map is to see the town and see what's near the towns. That'll help inspire you to come up with some cool stuff about that town. You see a town that's next to an ocean. Oh, obviously that's a port, right? There's a port there. It's a port town. That's easy. Or it's a fisher town. And that point you're getting that world building. But
for
let's say
sure.
you get find a town just in the middle of an open plain, and maybe there's a small river, and that's where the world. But like, because what does the map tell you about that? Nothing. It just tells you there's nothing interesting there. And so if the players go there and they want to go explore the place, let's say they visit there as they're traveling across these plains, they're going to be, well, they're going to wonder what's up with the town. Why is it here?
Mhm.
And that's where you're going to have these like question points. So you got to think, how do I improve this, right? What do I do? And
Um,
that's where we kind of prioritize really making high quality little assets and additions to your world than necessarily a ton of them.
yeah,
I
I
like
think
to,
that's really important. Oh no, go ahead, Jeremy. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh, it's all good. I personally like to plant little seeds for future world building and when I'm doing my like big prep for something. So if I make the town like this map and put the towns on it or whatnot, um, I might note for each town like a little thing like, oh, there are iron deposits near here, or there's a Fey crossing near here,
Ooh,
or something like that, just so that when I do get to that point, I have this little nugget of inspiration to work off of. And that, you're not sitting there and flushing out the whole town and going into the weeds with it, because it's really easy to get lost in the weeds. Super flushing out a random town on your world map that
that's
your
one that I've
players
seen
will
so many,
never
so
go
many
to.
times.
Yeah, that's let's actually just jump right onto that. I would highly recommend if you're doing a big map like that to not go deeper than those little seeds of inspiration. There's rich iron deposits here. This is a war camp. And just leave it at that so that that's something to like push you in a direction when your players get to those places. But if you're sitting there looking at this town that's literally in the bottom right corner of your map that no one will ever go to, and you're like, Jeff had a family of 8. His 3 of his children died at birth, and he works hard with his wife, also Jeff, who runs the nearby
His
tavern
wife's his
of
wife's name is Jeff, and his name is
of
Jeff.
of Jeff Tavern. Yeah, it's a Jeff Tavern. But
Oh,
like,
okay.
going into like a ton of detail about random NPCs in a town you don't know players will go to, not important. And it's
But
kind of I think a kind of a waste of your time
I
at that point.
absolutely agree, and I think that's another one of the most common traps of world building,
Absolutely.
is this idea that you need to have all of these tiny little, all of this minutia planned out, because you definitely do not. And knowing that Jeff, lost a child recently and is still grieving, poor Jeff. That's good if you know that the players are going to interact with Jeff. But if they're not, you don't need it. Use what you need. Um, but
That's
really taking I was gonna say, really taking your time and focusing on one thing and making it great. I think that's where your world building will start to shine, because if you know that they're going to meet Jeff the Tavern Keep, like your players, you've learned enough about them to know whenever they go to a new town, the first thing they always do is check in at the tavern, which a lot of D&D parties do actually do. So I want to make Jeff the Tavern Keep a really rich and interesting character, and when they're kind of meeting this individual, having it planned and having this whole elaborate backstory for them, that kind of informs the way the way he acts, and the way the players will interact with him. That's the kind of stuff that's going to make the players, think about and really like, wow, this world feels very real. This individual that's keeping the tavern, he doesn't feel like he was just kind of like a slapdash tavern keep that's just there to give us our drinks and tell us that there's orcs in the woods. He feels like a real person, but only do that for the characters that their players are going to get to see.
Yeah, and maybe it's not the characters that matter in the town. Maybe on this one town on your map, you decide, all right, there is a giant black obelisk in the middle of this town. It's just ancient black stone obelisk, and no one knows why it's there. And that's the thing, right? Because that's the player going to be drawn to that. They aren't going to care too much about the NPCs, and there's a giant structure or something really remarkable there. Maybe it's something about the environment around. Maybe it's built on in some sort of ruins. Maybe there is kind of a plate glass former desert around it, and there's no real explanation as to why. You can come up with these environmental details, and that's all you need, at least to start. And
Yeah,
actually, Pete was talking about really great idea with fleshing out this character Jeff. Let's say you get inspired, and that's what you like to do, right? Is come up with those NPCs, then do it, but don't tie them to one location.
great point.
Like
Great
Pete's
point.
doing in Worlds in this season, right? Modular content. Make a tavern that you can put this tavern where you need it. Anywhere in the south part of your continent, I can use this tavern in that town. It's just a cool way of really being able to get into the gritty details a little bit for this world building, while still not
Remaining
wasting
flexible.
breath. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I highly recommend it. Um, just well said, Jared. I want to take a moment to talk about some of the things that are said in chat. Um, so we haven't talked about chat yet. So
Hello,
Bakshi was saying
chat.
players never appreciate maps; they're never detailed enough. Yeah, yes and no. I don't know. I, as a player, always appreciate a map. Anytime a GM puts a map before me, I just get very excited and immediately spend my entire life looking at it. Um, Swordcoat here says, I've only got a general idea of where like 4 locations are, and I think also in referring to the weeds, but there's bombs and rupees hidden in the weeds. Um, that's
Yeah, but that's the thing. There are bombs.
Yeah,
You don't
you
want
got
to
to
get
be
hit by
careful of
bombs.
bombs. Well, in Zelda though, bombs
No, I know you collect the
are like
bombs.
weapons and treasure, and you pick them up and they're fun, Jeremy. There's nothing wrong with bombs. Um, but only a general idea of where 4 locations are. Yeah, and that's a totally fine. That's a totally fine amount of world building to do. To just kind of have like, oh yeah, roughly. There's over here. There's a dragon kingdom, and
Oh
over
yeah.
here there's the lich, and
Let's be frank here. Maps are super overrated. People spend a lot of time on maps that if they had spent that time on anything else, their game would be a lot better. That's just a fact.
build a map if you enjoy building maps, but never build a
Yeah.
map because you feel, oh well, I gotta have a map.
I was talking about DnDTime. Exactly, Sword. Exactly. We only have a general idea of where some of the places are because that's not super important to D&D time. Where things exactly are relevant to each other, relative to each other, that's not important.
Um,
Whereas if you were, I mean, a great comment in chat, Maddie Moore was saying, good world building also lets you hide clues or blatant answers in plain sight. One of the things I love, and I've seen this done a handful of times, right, is when the geography of your world actually is a clue, and that's where the map becomes important, right? Where your map kind of tells a story to a degree. Maybe there is an island chain that vaguely looks like the neck and head of a dragon.
yeah, I've heard of that one
And
before.
right, and then it's like, oh crap, it's the world's dragon or something. Uh,
Indeed.
and that becomes like a major point later, and then the players kind of get it because they've forgotten the weird likeness by that point, right?
Yeah. But it's funny that it's funny that you bring that up, Maddie, because my next talking point I have right here is building in plain sight, um, and that is when you're world building, and it's one thing, and we've talked about this before, I think, but when you're creating content for D&D, it's one thing to make really rich content, but that doesn't have value if your players don't get to interact with it. So you really have to use, opportunities in the game. Even, you create them for yourself sometimes, but you have to use and find opportunities to make the players both learn about the world and all this cool world building stuff that you do, and also want to learn about all the cool building stuff you do. Because, I mean, it's just me, but I get really bored really quick. I know that there's some other members of the community, cough cough switch if you're here, that don't like NPCs just expositing to you about just the ancient world terror that will come and strike in 1,000 years. That was prophesied, and listening to NPCs just kind of talk about that, it doesn't feel interactive. It doesn't feel like you're really playing the game. You're listening to somebody, exposit lore.
Yeah, good world building makes the world feel more real. That's the only reason you do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's to make the world. I mean, not really, but that's what should be your goal through world building is to make the world feel more real. If you sit down and you start talking about and you start talking about stuff to your players, even as an NPC, they're gonna get a little bored. It's just a fact of the matter. But let's take Dragon and Waterdeep Dragon Heist, for example. When you guys came out of the sewers, somewhat spoiler alert, into this tavern, and I could tell you what street that tavern was on, that was interesting. That was something that could have mattered.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
it's just a little detail like that. I'm not going to sit there and talk to you what every street name is. I did give you the map, but that's not the point. We didn't pour over the map and look at every street name on the map. But being able to just have a street name when you need it is nice. And being able to add that little bit of more detail. Yes, it was a nebulous tavern that doesn't really matter too much, but it gave it a little bit more character, a little bit more reality to it
Yeah.
because
Um,
it had a street name with
yeah, absolutely. And well, we also had a really great
it.
map because,
Pete
I
might
mean,
have poured over the map in his spare time. That's a fair point, Shiva.
there's
I
a
think you did, didn't you? Because you're looking for spices. You were looking for a cool street.
yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time looking at that map because I wanted to pick a street that my character would live on, and I picked Spice's Street because he likes food. Uh, um, but that is aside the point, and you're going to have players that are going to be like that. I'm one of those I'm one of those players that, like, I will read anything the GM gives me. I'll spend a lot of time looking at the map. I will get invested in a world, and there are a lot of players that can meet like that. But for the ones that don't, um, a lot of those players still enjoy world building. They just don't think that they do. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to kind of give it to them, like you would give, a child medicine. You hide it inside of the pudding, and you crush up the little pill because they don't like to take pills because they're a kid, and it tastes bad. But if you put it inside of, their pudding cup, then yeah, of course they're going to take their medicine. They're eating delicious pudding. And as a DM, if you have pieces of lore that you want to get across to your players, you have to find those ways to make it feel like they're just interacting with the world naturally, and that they're learning lore about it just through playing, and through encounters, and not just being told information.
I really like a great example. Um, was say in the Hobbit movie, the new one.
Hmm.
There's the sword. What is it? Troll splitter or something? And the Goblin King freaks out about it, right? It's like, oh
Yeah.
shit, that's the sword that did blow. And the sword just hadn't really been important before then. That's a really great way of doing that kind of stuff for these kinds of players. Give them a cool magic item, and if they're not interested in learning about the magic item, that's fine. Have the NPC go, oh shit, it's the that! Especially if it's an enemy NPC that is terrified of it, right? That's a really cool way of giving them that little bit of extra lore, making them feel great, and also making it feel a little more real. It's like this is a legendary sword, and people recognize it because it's a legendary sword,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It makes that not just a rarity on a weapon that makes it cost more and makes it only for higher level characters. No, that is a facet of it that it is a legend in the world. And yeah, I mean that I love that kind of stuff. Giants being afraid of an axe of giant slaying, right? Recognizing it and maybe being like, "That's Togren's axe of giant slaying," or whatever. I don't know.
Uh, Togren's Axe of Giant Slaying is a great name for an axe of giant slaying.
Yeah, Togren, because he grins when he cuts off giants' toes because he's a dwarf.
Yeah, and that's what Jeremy was talking about there is exactly what I was talking about. You need to find ways to engage the players, and having just an NPC directly react and be afraid of them because they're holding this sword. That's engaging to the players. They get excited, like, "Oh, I have some power now," and now that's also going to start kind of feeding questions in their mind, and you can do it. Like that's like a really strong one. You can do it in even more kind of like subtle and smaller ways. Maybe the players are going to a store, and they're looking to purchase some gemstones or diamonds for spell casting focuses. And when they go in and speak to the shopkeeper, the prices are either high or they're very low on stock, and the shopkeeper kind of grumbles, "Yes, I'm sorry, we would have had more, but the bandits out east have been raiding some of the villages, and the prices have gone very much up. It's been hard getting any shipments in." And now it's not necessarily, you wanted to tell the players about those bandits that are kind of raiding, or whatever the reason is. Maybe the government has been buying up all of the kingdom has been buying up all of the diamonds for their kind of court wizards for something that they're doing. Either way, it creates a question in the player's mind, and that's the way you get your players to interact with your lore. Is you create these questions where, well, why? How come they're doing that? Because that means they're now interested and invested in your lore, and they're going to probably ask the NPC about it. Like, oh, how come the local kingdom is buying up all of these diamonds? Well, maybe this individual doesn't know, but you're creating that kind of desire for information in your players.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's a very helpful little tool in your DM toolbox. Um, Pete, do you have anything else to say about this kind of like these little bits of world building? Because
Um,
I want to move on to another topic, but if we've got more to say, let's roll with it.
no, no, go ahead.
So we've talked a lot about like this more granular, smaller scale kind of stuff. We haven't talked as much about the big picture. And
Hmm.
yeah, we talked about maps and towns and laying that framework, but I'm talking about like the big picture.
Yeah,
So, in your setting, more often than not, you have a big bad. It might be some kind of world ending threat. It could be warring factions if you're making a more complex or political world, especially if you're making more political setting.
yeah.
Um, it could be some sort of natural cataclysm that the characters have to sort of exploit. The whole gimmick to your game might be that your reality is part of a great multi-helical uh, layered sandwich of realities where players can jump between dimensions.
That
It could
was
be any
Jeremy's
sort.
world.
That was in my world. It could be any number of various little things like that. And the most important thing is that you really just don't worry about it too much. I let's take the most complicated example first. I created a setting and I ran a campaign in a setting where I thought what the end game was going to be the players kind of world hopping through different mirror realities as they kind of fled away from this big bad thing and learned more about it to defeat it.
Hmm.
And they immediately, like instantly, as soon as they got like really started to understand what was going on, they decided, no, we're gonna stay and we're gonna fight it here, and if we die, we die. We're not gonna abandon our reality with the people we know that we have built bonds with, even if there's eerily similar duplicates of them in this other reality. And that was well, that wasn't what I expected to do in that campaign for certain, but it was fine because I didn't worry too much. Nothing, that was my plan, but the big picture didn't hinge on it, right? The game succeeding did not hinge on that specific element. And I hadn't wasted a ton of time thinking about it. I maybe thought, I definitely thought a little bit about what some of these mirror worlds might be, right? And what the subtle changes in existence might be between them, but I didn't go into a ton of detail. And that's something like I could have spent hours figuring out, oh, how is this world going to be different from the one below it? And then, oh, the world changes a little bit for the next one. How is it going to be a little different there? I could have spent forever figuring out like the little tiny nuances of what made those different. And it's a really good thing I didn't, because that would have been a huge waste. And I mean, I've seen a lot of people, and this happens sometimes, not every time, but I've seen, especially homebrew campaigns, start off just players adventuring with the DM having the final goal of, all right, I know who the big bad is going to be, but they're really not going to show up until like later. They're just going to be more a background force in
Yeah.
the world. And they think so much about that big bad and like, oh my gosh, we're gonna flush them out and make sure, all right, they have this army of Baelors, including Gazrix the Unslayable, who's the king of Baelors, and he's got a cool crown of planetar ribs, right, that come up like spikes around his head, and you come up with all this great lore about that, and then your campaign ends at level 4. And you have spent 90% of your prep time for that campaign on stuff that
Never
was
came up.
10 levels away from even rearing its head.
That is one of
That
the
is
biggest possible
every
takeaways.
campaign. That's every campaign.
Oh yeah, for sure. I've never heard a campaign end other than at level 20 where the DM didn't spend a lot of time, after the campaign going, and I'm not going to say that I myself am innocent of this, going, oh man, I had so many big I had so many big plans for this campaign. I've certainly done it. I'm sure you have as well, Jeremy.
Yeah, oh, everyone does. But DMing is it's the opposite of chess. In chess, you want to play like 4 turns ahead. You don't want to do that in D&D. At most, you want to plan 2 or 3 sessions ahead in detail. At best, at most. Everything else should just kind of be a vague outline.
And it's not to say that it's not okay to know who your big bad is.
Oh, of course. Great. It's very good.
And if you want your big bad to kind of be an important factor in the world, though, and you want to move to those points, just make them a factor now. Don't have the players, like, if you want to ever, if you want to flesh out this big bad, have the minions of that individual, or even the individual, show that they're an impact of the world in the immediate. Because one, that's going to make your players excited and want to defeat the big bad by interacting with them. Presumably, they'll want to defeat the big bad because your big bad is probably doing evil things that your players will be, desire to stop. But if they don't ever see any of the signs of them, they won't learn that you have this cool lore and all of these, like, awesome generals. They'll never see that, what was it, a planetar ribcage as a helmet or something?
I don't know.
It was cool. I don't know. It was cool, and it sounded very intimidating. I should have written
it down as I went.
Ah, yes. Excellent tip right there. Make sure you write things down. But if the players don't see it, it doesn't matter. So make sure you show them.
And more than that, right? Like, that's what keeps campaigns going, is players being interested and engaged and asking why, right? If you have a big bad and you decide that the whole point of your big bad is they're a powerful archmage and they're experimenting with time and they want to go back in time, and maybe their goal is so simple as they want to stop their mother from dying to an orc that invaded their town. Right? Like a very noble cause for what has become a very evil character, twisted and corrupted. The moral dilemma of killing this person who only wishes to use their magic for good, but so many have died because of it. Right?
My evil does not matter, for when I go back in time, it will all be erased.
Exactly, right? This is now a moral dilemma. Well, maybe he's right. What if this wizard's right? What if they'll fix everything when they go back in time? And, right, that's like your big deal. And your players are never going to get to that, or at least not for a long time. And so throw in little things. Maybe give a particular enemy, right? Maybe there is an apprentice wizard, and you take the apprentice wizard stat block, and your characters are like, they're level 6, and they're like, this is just this is a little miserable apprentice wizard. And the apprentice wizard has some soldiers with them, and the apprentice wizard tells them to attack, and then the apprentice wizard casts time stop, and the party's just like, holy what? And you put these little tiny tidbits in, even if it's they cast time stop and it lasts for 1 turn, and that is their special apprentice wizard ability. And that's crazy, right? Because you've taken this very interesting feature, it's really not that powerful, to be honest, that ties them back to that person, to that big bad, that chronomancer. And that's neat.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's world building.
That's world building. And I guess we're talking a little bit about campaign planning as well at this point.
A little bit. You can't not.
Yeah, those two things. There's so much in D&D that ends up becoming intertwined. Like, you can't talk about world building without talking about, how to develop interesting NPCs and how to plan a campaign and all these different things. But in campaign planning, a strategy that I like to use and that I think is an effective way to kind of go about, moving things around, is to plan is to just kind of plan a bunch of points that at different times that the players can reach and then interact with. And when I say points, what I mean is be they oh, I see you're just changing the topic on the Twitch. When I say points, I mean they could be sorry, I just it caught me as funny. Those could be, major events, but make them things that are tangible and very much near in the future for your players. World
Yeah.
build out the next big thing, not the ultimate big thing, but the next big thing. And taking extra time to like, oh well, your players are going to be attending a festival in a couple of months, and taking the time to like, all right, yeah, I really want to focus on the festival and make sure that that's great, because that's going to be kind of a mini climax to this campaign, and that's the next big kind of stopping point that they're going to reach. And there's going to be adventure and interesting things to do to get there, but that's where I want to like focus my next chunk of attention, and that's fine. But make sure that those kind of goals and those world building preparations are in your reasonable future.
Yeah, keep things on your radar, right? And here's the thing, right? You take that world building for your festival, right? And all right, there's a festival in this town in 2 weeks, and the players have been here for like a month, and it looks like they're going to stay here for a while. And there's some stuff that's going to come up. You don't think they're really going to leave, and you start prepping the festival, and you're describing how the town is kind of changing, how like people are putting up decorations and stuff. And then that thing you didn't think the players were going to care about too much, well, they really cared about, and they leave the town. And you're just thinking, oh my gosh, I wasted all this prep for the festival. But then the players feel bad because they're missing the festival, and you're not actually wasting any prep, right? Because you're evoking this emotional response out of your players. And it's oh man, we're missing this fun festival. But that's also a cool turning point, because that's not a bad thing for a character to necessarily feel.
Oh yeah.
It's also a good thing, because it's your characters having that dilemma of what's fun versus what we need, what our duty is, right? What we have to do. And even though, yeah, you might have prepped more than you ended up using for that festival, just that little bit of like people are preparing for the festival was enough to really evoke that response out of your players, and so that's not wasted prep.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely great prep. And it's kind of a paint by, well, it's a play it by ear deal. If we're taking back to the early sign when they're walking across those plains, and there's a town in the middle of the plains, and they're gonna probably walk right toward the town. That'd be a good thing to flush out a little bit. Take some time, and they're pretty
Yeah.
close to it. They're walking right at it, and then they see it in the distance, and they go, "Oh, there's lights. We're gonna scoot around," because they don't know. They're scared it could be enemies, and so they scoot around the whole town and avoid it. That's not wasted prep either. Well, it might be a little wasted. Maybe they'll come back on the way. Maybe you describe in the morning, they notice, oh, it's a town. But taking a little bit of time to work on those things that are in the immediate horizon, go for it. Don't be afraid to prep something that is reasonably likely to come up.
Yeah, I often think of those kind of. I often think of kind of the line of how a campaign progresses as kind of. I picture a helix with your festival would be kind of the cross point, where the helix kind of moves in and connects to draw kind of an odd timeline, and then as it's kind of like branching out from these points, there's now all of a sudden a ton of different directions it's going to go out, but then move back in again towards one more kind of refined point, which is I don't know if that description made a lot of sense, because I see you, Jeremy, kind of.
I was confused, and then I got what you were going for, and I understand it now.
Where
two-dimensional helix. It's not an actual three-dimensional.
No, not a three-dimensional helix.
All right,
I was thinking of more of the the representation of the helix.
I get it now. I was just real confused for a second.
And having those kind of intersections on the helix, so to speak, being a little bit more prepped, and then having also that extra flexibility to spread out in between them and to be ready to react to your players. And as we talked about earlier, maybe your players don't go to one of those points, and that's going to happen. That's inevitably going to be happening. But no good work goes unwasted. Everything that you have prepped there can be modified and found a place for somewhere else in your campaign. Never let a cool idea go to waste.
Absolutely. And what Pete meant was no good work gets wasted. Don't waste the good stuff.
Wait, what did I say?
You said unwasted.
No good work
Uh,
goes on. um,
Missed that one, Pete. But yeah, I mean exactly what Pete's saying. You know, if they do circumvent that town, that's fine. Next time you did a town in the middle of the plains, you have one. You've made it. You're good.
um, to
So
discuss
don't worry
another
about that.
common phenomenon I see in world building, another thing that people talk about a lot is this kind of concept that and I think this is another like point of pride for a lot of DMs, and it's this idea that the world is alive and moves regardless of whether or not you're aware of it, and that is cool. But that is also you should consider that part of the DM illusion. Um,
Yeah.
the world doesn't actually move.
Or it
As
can. You don't have to.
yes, yes. The world doesn't have to actually move, but it is really cool for players to create the illusion that the world is moving around them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And part of that, right, is stuff like, I mean, little bits of flavor. Let's say you have the big bad and they are a Knoll war band led by Pete. What was the cool Knoll that we came up with in Worlds?
Um, oh gosh, I cannot remember her name at the top of my head. This is why we take notes, people.
This is why we
But
take notes.
she was kind of a blind Knoll war leader.
So
That was a cleric of Inogu.
we have this Knoll warband that worships Inogu, and they've been rampaging literally and figuratively across the countryside, causing terror and all sorts of widespread panic. And maybe there's something more to this that like the normal people don't pick up on that your players might. This is like a world building exercise. Perhaps there's like a calling card that they leave of this of that they have been here. Perhaps they, using the bleached, burnt bones of their enemies, spell out the words
Inogu.
Inogu rises right in Infernal or in Demonic. I'm sorry, Abyssal. Just in the middle
In
of wherever
Infernal.
they are. In Infernal, yeah, weird, real weird. She
That's a
misunderstands
story.
Inogu, but you know, doing that's cool, right? And said something that you might at the first time describe. Oh yeah, you see these. The bodies have been ripped apart and their bones seemingly scattered around. And it's just like, oh wow, that's weird. Because players don't know how to read Abyssal, especially when it's spelled out in huge bones. And you know, then the next time the players come across some place that this horde is attacked, yeah, it's very much the same as before: bones torn from bodies and laid out. You know, kind of similar pattern to what you remember from before, or what have you. And you know, eventually they start to pick up on this, right? And then sometime later, you know, maybe 6, 7 sessions, they're in a city, they're visiting some shady underground places because they need someone to use reincarnation on one of their allies,
Mm-hmm.
and they notice kind of carved into the door frame are those symbols. And it's like, oh shit, what's going on here? This place has affiliation with demonic Inogu worshippers, and this is interesting now, right? You're building on this calling card rather than the players at this point. They have no idea what this enemy is. They have no idea um, who the big bad is, but just these little tiny traces, right? These little symbols are cool to. I don't know. I think that's just a really cool way to help engage players a little bit more. The
Um,
enemy you know is never as scary as the enemy that's kind of nebulous, that is unknown.
and as a DM, this to go back a little bit to that idea of the world kind of moving around them, and a great trick, and I think it only needs to you only need to do it to the players once for them to get
Yep.
this feeling for the rest of the campaign that the world is moving around them. Is when they come to let them encounter the gnolls, and if a gnoll gets away, or a gnoll like doesn't in some way the gnolls encounter the players and then they don't completely wipe them out. Have at the next town that they go at, well, it's been ransacked by the gnolls, and then the players instantly feel like, oh man, if we had stopped those gnolls back there, then this probably wouldn't have happened. Well, in truth, it was just there was just a much bigger warband, and you were gonna, even if they killed all the gnolls there, still have it be there. But you've now kind of had this opportunity where, well, you can impart one, a moral lesson, and two, make the world feel full by making it feel like the player's actions have led to something happening in it.
Yeah, and I mean, even small things, like, that's a major one that has
Yeah, that's big.
moral consequences to a player where they feel like, oh man, we fucked up. But I mean, even just a little thing like you describe next to the tavern, there's a bunch of halflings all climbing up on ladders building a house. And then they leave that town and they come back. And when you describe it next, you describe the pleasant little storefront right next to the tavern. You just one tiny detail that you mention, and that's all you have to describe, right? A bunch of hardworking halflings wearing overalls and straw hats building a house.
Mhm.
And then just describe the
And
house
then
finished next time they visit, assuming they leave for an appreciable amount of time.
it
Or
can be
hell,
something as simple as you visit a shopkeeper. You visit a shopkeeper 6 months later, and this time he's grown a beard. Like
yeah,
those kind of small details, like he's grown a beard to show that time has passed. That's like that's totally fine, and that's like, oh yeah, that sounds about right. It'll make your players just feel a little bit more connected.
I completely agree. Or hell, they've retired. Oh, that's a rough one. They've retired and an absolutely vicious, evil shopkeeper has taken over.
Uh,
Uh,
my son has taken over the shop now. He's a good boy. Has been a did have a few problems as a child, but I trust him. Just lightning cracks over a shop.
uh-oh.
Yeah. Also, don't do that. Don't ever make lightning ominously crackle over over your shops. Uh, and by that I mean definitely do that, because never don't do something that someone tells you never to do.
Anyway,
Want to do
we've
Ask
gotten
Pete
on
and Jeremy?
I was gonna say we've gone on a little bit of a tirade, a little bit of a tangent here, but I think that's okay. It's a very open topic.
It's an infinite topic.
But yeah, let's move on to our next segment, our ending segment. Hello, Diadems 1970.
Hi.
So let's talk about our next segment, which is Ask Pete and Jeremy, a segment where that's right, you, Mr. Chat or Mrs. Chat or Ms. Chat, you don't have to be married,
Or just
can
chat.
jump on, or Miss Chad, correct, can jump onto our Discord server, links below, and you can go to the Ask Pete and Jeremy channel and ask us some questions, and we'll answer them. I mean, you can ask questions in chat too, but I think we're more likely to sit down and give them some more time if you'd put them down here in the Ask Pete and Jeremy section, because we made this segment for it.
We got a lot of them today.
Yeah, let's start with the first one. VBunny23 asks, what spells did Lord Swoldemort have?
Oh man.
This is an easy one.
He had Magic Muscle, which was a reskinned Magic Missile where he flexed. He had Burning Biceps, where he flexed his biceps specifically. And he had one of my personal favorite was Eldritch Lats instead of Eldritch Blasts, where he did his laterals and also shooted blasts. It was mostly he flexed and shot energy blasts. Was kind of his whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's Lord Swoldemort.
If you can come up with a good muscle pun, he probably would have had it.
Yep.
You want me to just read them off, Pete, and then I'll just read. Yeah, I'm just gonna
go
do
for
the
it.
read. Rex Rakota asks, "Have you ever? Do you ever fudge DM rolls or play it straight? If you have, when was a time you regretted fudging a roll?" Ooh.
I'm not gonna say I never fudge rolls, or I've never fudged a roll, because I'm sure that I have. But if I'm gonna fudge something, it's not the roll, and it's like enemy health, or the number of enemies that are in a party. Like, oh, there were reinforcements. Those are the things I would fudge, not rolls. Actually,
I
I
wouldn't
pretty
call
much
that fudging. That's just adaptive adventure design.
Yeah, because I always roll in the open, so it's very hard to fudge.
To answer that question, have I ever fudged a roll? Yeah, I have definitely fudged a roll. But there are two circumstances in which I don't fudge roll, and that is in dire situations that are intended to be dire and feel good being dire, and yeah, basically that. The only time I really ever would do something like that is if a player is getting trashed against. It's like the bunch of bandits, right, attack the level 8 paladin in the alley, and your level 8 paladin should just be able to trash these CR1 quarter bandits, but they're like
But
critting left and right. The
yeah,
paladin
yeah.
just feels so bad. And the paladin's supposed to feel like a total badass smiting things with his sword. Alright, I'm gonna fudge some rolls and let them do that. Because man, no one likes getting totally dumped on when it's supposed to be a goofy, fun thing. So yeah, I fudged some rules, but generally speaking, it's not to punish. And in dire situations that like are dramatic, oh no way, you
Yeah,
live or
for
die by
sure.
those dice.
Amen.
Farku asks, do you target players specifically? Do you target players specifically? Is it for thematic, mechanical, or fairness reasons?
And my answer to that is yes, 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 and yes. Um, and I think you're referring specifically to in combat. Um, and I think am more likely to choose a target specifically than I am not to. It's actually very rare that I have an enemy like randomly
Yeah.
assigned damage, and it's always for a mix of those things. Sometimes thematic, like if I'm trying to portray a beast attacking. Honestly, I'll just be like, oh, they just attacked the closest thing because that's what they would do. And like Jeremy was just talking about, maybe the paladin gets crit a whole bunch, and the combat just started, and people are kind of having fun, and then like I'll make choices sometimes, like yeah, the enemy could like take out the bard in one hit because he's right in front of him. He has like one hit point left, but the battle just started, and I don't want my friend to have to like not play for a whole like battle for like a whole hour. So maybe I'll just have him like push that character aside and go and grab someone else and find a reason to justify it. But the answer is I mostly target players specifically.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's rare that I target randomly.
Yeah,
Incredibly rare. Even for like a beast, right? A beast doesn't attack randomly, right? They attack for a thematic reason. They attack either the closest thing, the thing that hurt them the most if they're like seriously injured, or the
yeah,
weakest looking thing. And those are the thought processes I go through when I'm thinking about those monsters. When I'm talking about random like sentient like humanoids especially that understand spellcasting, all right, if they recognize what a cleric is and your character looks like a cleric and they know what clerics can do, they're going to attack you first
for sure.
because they don't want the rest of the party to come back up. You
Um,
know, if they're
and
like, yeah, it's
the only
exactly those
time
kind
you
of.
target randomly is when the enemy's a beholder.
Yeah, right. When the enemy is in some way impaired and has
Yeah.
to target right.
Yep.
But yeah, so I guess that is the reason. All of those things are very reasonable.
Yeah, for sure.
Mechanics is one of the fewest times I target specific, but usually if it's for mechanical reason, it's because
Um,
like a T-Rex can't attack and tail swing the same creature, and so
yeah,
that would be
yeah.
the reason for my mechanic pick. But that's pretty much it. Bionic Shiba asks, when was a time your players didn't catch on to blatantly obvious plot hooks? Or to a
I
blatantly obvious plot hook?
I don't have one off the top of my head, Jeremy. Do you?
A blatantly obvious plot hook. Oh, excuse me, hiccup. I'm almost positive it happened. I just can't come up with it off the top of my head, personally.
Me as well. If I come up with it before we go make it the way through, I will circle back.
All right. Well, another actually comment on that question. A lot of the times, it's because I think something is blatantly obvious, and then it's not. That happens a lot of
Yeah.
time. Like if I'm trying to come up with like a puzzle, that'll happen. About 50-50, where it's like I thought I was making my puzzle very clear, but they just didn't even realize there was a puzzle. And I feel like that's like those are those missed plot hooks. It's they didn't even realize that I was even considering putting a plot hook out there. So anyway, Reflected 10.8 asks, what's the innocent detail you most regret placing in a game after your players ran it to the most absurd possible conclusion?
Um, yeah, I think I have one for this. I wouldn't
Okay.
say I regret placing it. It just the players reacted to something I put in the game in a way I very much didn't expect, which was it was like session one, and uh, I was playing in a setting that it was a homebrew setting, and I was actually just trying to do some world building, and I had a little kind of uh, clue to some of the nature of the world to start get them thinking about it that I thought was kind of clever. Where they are in their home was in basically a salt flats, just like this really barren territory. But there were also just occasionally interspersed throughout it some old, like dead trees that were really dried up. And I started kind of describing this tree to the players, and I said, "Yeah, and despite the kind of the terrible nature of the land, the tree that you see here is actually a deciduous tree." And I wanted them to kind of come to the conclusion, like, "Oh, that's weird. There used to be maybe like a lush forest here." The players came to the conclusion that, from a more meta perspective, that I, Pete the Dungeon Master, was saying, "This tree is important. Let's investigate it." And they spent about 15 minutes trying to like examine the tree, like searching through its roots, until it got to the point where I realized that they thought I had like created a plot. I had to actually tell them out of character, "Guys, this was just a tree. Like I just put this here for flavor and for you guys to like look at and to like set the scene." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, I thought that was a quest." And I was like, "Nope, it was not a quest."
I think that's the kind of opposite of what Shiba's question was. Players coming up with a plot hook out of nothing.
Yeah.
All right. I'm not sure I necessarily have a great answer to that one, but I know that it has happened. You know what? No, it's it usually for me is like little gags, but it's Bartimus the donkey.
Yes.
From a campaign I ran a long time ago. I've talked about Bartimus a few times. But yeah, it was just a joke that like whenever they'd be in combat or whatever, and they're not thinking about Bartimus, and then when the combat is over, Bartimus is just somewhere unexpected. It's like, Bartimus, how'd you get on that ledge up there? And it started off with like just kind of little things, and then it ended up being just kind of ridiculous after a while. It's like, Bartimus, how did you get to the top of that statue? But
that's cute though. It's fun.
It's fun little gags. But Shiba asks, what's the most horrifying thing you put into a game that players didn't catch on to?
Do you got one, Jeremy?
No.
This is another one that I know I have a thing that it's on the back of my mind that it's happened before, but I can't quite catch it.
Like, I don't know. I think maybe... No, I don't know. It's weird. It's hard for me to like think too much about this kind of stuff because like most of the time if there's something horrifying in a game, the players get it. They're like, "Oh, geez."
Yeah. I guess it would be like, something like subtle that like the players were doing without realizing it that was like terrible, or like the kind of thing like I've definitely had like a magic item that was sinister in a way that the players didn't realize that it was. Like I think I had a magic item once that was like slowly kind of draining away at their soul, and they eventually just kind of threw it away before it could finish, and so they just never knew about it.
Oh well, pretty brutal actually.
Yeah.
No, I think the closest thing to that I had is one of the players got a vial of like a very contagious ooze kind of monster. It was like a tiny little shrunken ooze that would be basically like a bioweapon. And for some reason, they gave it to the chaotic neutral rogue, who didn't use it, weirdly enough, but always threatened to. I don't know. I'm not sure. They didn't really catch on how bad it would have been if they used that. That would have been really bad. Everyone would have turned into oozes. The Forgotten One asks, you said homebrew races/classes are based more on demand of the player base. Do you plan on implementing a poll-based system in the future to determine what could be the next theme for brews? Mind if I cover this one, Pete?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, the answer is no. We're not going to implement some kind of poll or anything like that. If we see people talking about stuff in the chat and being excited about stuff, we'll probably do it. But we don't. I feel like we don't want to be beholden necessarily to simply the demands in the crowd. Like in world building, if you're not feeling it, it's not going to be that great. So, yeah.
And
we gotta be feeling it too.
And on a smaller scale. Last time we did a homebrew, for example, we did do a poll where we put up a little
Yep.
tally of voting of stuff that we had kind of curated. So I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, we let people kind of, pick, but we do want to like at least curate the list, kind of in the America's Got Talent style, where we like the judges, so to speak, pick out the ones that we like, but then America votes on like of those ones that we kind of like, which ones we pick. Which that's something that we may do more often because we did that last time.
Oh, and actually, I want to go back to Shiva's question. The most horrifying thing I put into a game that players didn't catch on to. It's build a space whale. He eats everything, guys. He's gonna eat you someday. He's gonna consume the universe. Anyway, Reflect Donate says, how do you cope with the constant flow of time and the knowledge that it all ends? That's my answer.
I remember one time I realized that it was all going to end someday. Because sometimes, Jeremy, have you never had existential dread? Have you never been in that moment where all of a sudden you're just kind of like, someday
I
I
felt
just
the call
won't
of
be
the
here.
void. I felt the call of the void, but existential dread is nothing. It's nothing that's ever really gotten me.
It's hit me once in my life, and I was like, oh no, it's all going to end someday. And then I thought, well, nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, I'm very much like, I might get hit by a bus tomorrow kind of guy.
Yeah, nothing. There's nothing to do about it, so
Or I'll live forever because of robots.
you just do cope with it. I think is the answer. Is you just kind of do.
Yeah, like I said,
Farku. There was more.
Yeah, Farku asks, how long do you think DnDTime will last? I think
Oof.
we actually have a timeline for that. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, do we want to?
I don't know if we want to answer that necessarily, but for a while longer.
Yeah, quite a bit longer. There's quite a bit more D&D time. Don't you worry, it's not ending anytime soon. But there definitely is an end to time, or at least
I assume you're referring to Pete and
as
Jeremy
it is now.
time. Yeah.
I mean, we're going to be streaming indefinitely.
Yeah, I don't foresee myself not streaming for a very long time, longer than probably just the shelf life, so to speak, of just Pete and Jeremy's D&D time.
Work would have to really beat me.
It would mean we were in a much different place in our lives, but at the moment, we're going forever.
Pete and Jeremy for 100 years.
100 years, Pete and Jeremy.
Farku also asks, what if there was a 6th edition of D&D? Well, there won't be a 6th edition of D&D for a very long time. And if there is, assuming they keep the same design team, which has made Hasbro so many millions and millions of dollars, I think it'd be excellent.
And I will play it either way. I will try it. I will at least try it out. And if they ever release 6th edition, I will be very excited about it and spend as much time as I can with it.
I was so anti 5th edition when it first came out. I hated it so much.
Really? I remember you being... maybe I just saw you in the phase after you got used to it, because I remember you being excited about it.
My issue... Yeah, it was the very beginning. It was a playtest I hated. I saw it, and I said, oh my gosh, all of these classes are so simplified. It's just a small branching tree. Cleric only gets, like, 2 options. Otherwise, all the clerics are the same. You just pick your subclass, and that's it. Nothing else matters. You all get the same spells. All the characters are going to be so boring. And then I was like, huh. Okay, never mind. I was wrong.
I make it good. And that's the great thing about 5e. Yeah, what if I make it good? Reflected Senate asks, where is the best place to begin world building? And oh man, I don't know if we ever answered that in our discussion of world building today, because it's so difficult and it's so dependent. But as a general rule of thumb, and I think an answer that can't be wrong, is the best place to begin world building is where the area in which you intend for your players to begin the campaign.
Yeah,
there's just so many answers that we could give.
I don't necessarily... It depends on the campaign. Like...
That's fair.
Because here's the thing, right? Let's talk about, like, an adventure where, there's a big bad, and the players are going to be in a starting location, and they're going to go somewhere and learn about the big bad for the first. Knowing that starting location is nowhere near as important as knowing that first place they're going to go. right?
Yeah. Well,
I think
that's what I mean by that.
yeah,
To be
of
fair,
course. I was just clarifying a little bit. It's
yeah.
that first step. Making that first step is engaging and um, rich without going overboard. Like really taking a few things and making them really good. I think that's your best place.
I'm world building right now for a game I plan to run sometime soon, and that is what I'm doing. If that's any frame of reference, the way I'm choosing to world build is starting with the start, and
Going on till the end, and then you're finished.
yeah, pretty much.
Matty Morgs asks, which house rule are you the most proud of creating? What did it do, and what was the context for making it?
Do you have an answer?
Yeah. I don't give a fuck about bonus action spellcasting rules unless you're a sorcerer. I think that should have just been a note on the Sorcerer's Quicken Spell meta map. That's my personal feeling. I understand there are other balance purposes for it. Maybe clerics will actually use their maces a little more frequently if they have to use that when they're casting spiritual weapon. Blah 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 blah. But what's really mad, like I don't know. I just think it's more fun to be able to guiding bolt and spiritual weapon in the same turn. So that's personally my feel. I mean, that's not really a proud one, but that's one I really like. I don't use a ton of
I have a
mostly my magic items are homebrewed.
I have a homebrew rule that I actually really love, um, and that is my homebrew inspiration rule. I started using it about a year ago, and it works really well, and I recommend it. And the way I homebrew inspiration, it requires a little bit more improvisation as a DM, but instead of the normal inspiration, because I feel like personally I forget to give it out a lot, so it ends up being kind of like a big deal when I give it out, because it means you've done something that was cool enough for me to remember that inspiration exists, uh, and to go like, oh wait, you just did something so awesome. There has to be some way I can reward you for the. Oh yeah, inspiration is in the game. And so the way I run it is, if you have a point of inspiration, you can use it more literally like inspiration. You are inspired in a moment, and you are able to. If you can make a case to me for why your character would be able to do a thing, you can go outside of the normal bounds of what your character could do. So I've had people use inspiration. One time, a player wanted to use inspiration to cast a spell while they were downed, because their cleric was a god of life and death, and they were like treading the lines. That was their justification. I was like, yeah, that was radical, and it made a lot of really dramatic moments when it's been used in the past, and everyone who's played with it has really enjoyed it. So that's mine.
Alrighty, we got a couple more quick ones. I think at this point we're not taking any more new questions because we got to finish up at some point.
These are the last ones.
And feel free to keep adding them, but we'll get to them next week. Farku asks, are you reading any of these questions? We are. Crowley asks, waffles or pancakes? Pete, I'm looking at you.
Pancakes with a full breakfast, but waffles isn't a meal unto themselves.
Okay, I agree. I was a little offended for a moment that you were going against the waffles, but then I listened to the rest of your point, and I agree. I think pancakes are better with a full breakfast. Waffles are better as a solo, or maybe like you can put like strawberries and whipped cream.
Yeah. But if the meal is emphasized on it, I would rather eat waffles than
eggs
pancakes.
And bacon and toast. You want the. All right. Blood Deuce, last question. In the same vein as Maddie's question, this is probably easier for Jeremy to answer. What's your favorite 4E house rule? What was it, and why was it a thing?
Jeremy?
My favorite 4E house rule. Here's the thing: a lot of people miss about me. I don't remember anything. My brain is just boing, in one ear, out the other, very hollow. Did we have any 4E house rules? I don't know if we did, actually. We played very much by the books. I was the rules lawyer of 4th edition. I knew every rule to the dot. I could cross my T's, dot my I's. I knew everything. If at any point during combat you missed an attack, you needed merely to look to me and say, Jeremy, what rule am I forgetting that will get me an additional +2 to hit? And I would be able to figure it out. So yeah, I don't think I actually did any house rule stuff then.
I have actually a favorite 4E house rule.
Good thing.
I played 4E one time, and Jeremy was running the game, and I was playing some, I don't know, really edgy character that was based on my favorite character from League of Legends, because it was for a one shot, and he had an ability that allowed him to teleport a lot, and I think we fudged it so I could use it more often because it was more fun that way, and I was using it for stupid stuff. And that was my favorite 4E house rule. Was it allowed me to, I think at one point, I was putting wards on people to teleport to them to me, so after they finished fighting, I could teleport them back so they could drink with me because I had a keg of ale. And that was my favorite 4E house rule.
And there you go, folks. God, who hasn't tried to make a League of Legends character in Dungeons and Dragons in the past? I know I did one. It was very hard. Actually, it was really easy in 4th.
I played a League of Legends character that you tried to make in Bessem.
That's true. Farfel says, you could do some really dumb stuff in 4E without house rules. Yeah, no, you could do literally anything in 4. I mean, not literally. You could do a lot in 4th edition just with magic items. That's one thing I actually kind of miss. I miss the magic item slots of 4E compared with the attunement system of 5E, I think. It's been a long time, but I liked designing to item slots more than... Because I love the idea of a character having like 8 magic rings. That just feels so sick. They're so blinged out.
I like the 5E.
Well, Pete, you just don't understand. You don't know
No,
what
I
it's
get
like.
it. No, Jeremy.
You don't know what it's like, Pete.
No,
Having
Jeremy,
so many magic rings. All these magic rings give me a +1 to my Constitution bonus.
I would rather my...
All right. Hit die.
And that's all for today's episode of DnDTime Talks. Thank you all so much for hanging out and watching. It's been a fun topic tonight. Like I said, a very broad one tonight. And maybe someday we'll go into more nitty-gritty on some of like the sub-topics within world building because they are vast and infinite. Thanks again, everyone. Watch our other shows. Jeremy, what other shows do we do?
Oh, well, Pete, I'm glad you asked. On Friday, we have Pete and Jeremy's DnDTime. That was the worst singing ever. It's a fun little show where Pete and I run 3 actually they're like 2 hour, one-shot adventures featuring you, the viewers. It's a lot of fun. It's really exciting. No adventure is the same as the last. Ugh. And it's gonna be a good week. I think it's gonna be a very normal week. I think we've got a myth game lined up. I'm hoping. It's gonna be very exciting. So tune in, play some D&D with we. Oh yeah, and if you're new to the stream, just jump on our website, dndtime.stream, and you can sign up to play today.
Linked below. Discord links too, so hang out with us there as well. And also hang out with us on Sunday, where Jeremy continues to run us through Waterdeep Dragon Heist. This Sunday, I'm sure will be as fun as the last ones have been. I look forward to
this Sunday's going to be excellent. I'm very excited about this Sunday. We got
me
through
as well.
Just as a very quick recap of last Sunday. Last time we met for Dragon Heist, they all got a house and they met their neighbors and really did not hit it off with one of them. And I'm really excited to explore the consequences of their actions and how if they find living in a city more difficult than fighting monsters like mind flayers. I think the answer is going to be yes.
But I loved him.
A mind flayer?
Oh no, I was talking about Groon. Was it Groon? Emmett? Broon?
Froon's Blues.
Froon? Yeah, I liked Froon. He's going to work for us someday. I'm going to convince all of our fellow party that. Thank you all again for watching DnDTime Talks. I'm Pete.
And I'm Jeremy. And this is
DnDTime Talks.
Thank you.